I call Sir Peter Bottomley to move the motion.
Thank you very much. This is an opportunity for government to put their description of the progress being made, describe what's in their mind at the moment, and to give us some hope that there'll be even further improvements in the future. Before I start in detail, can I thank colleagues who've worked really hard on this. I welcome the fact that the Labour Party has got proposals of their own. I know the Lib Dems have done the same. In particular, I'd like to thank and to praise the Honourable Gentleman for Poplar, who has done more on this than any other Member of Parliament in the House of Commons. To thank the Honourable Member for Ellesmere Port, who's joined in and helped to make the scandal of the leasehold homes in the North West so relevant. And to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Kingston, who was involved deeply in the early stages of the campaign by the charity Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, who in their campaign both for ordinary leaseholders, flats and houses, but also in the retirement field, have done so much to make it possible that the work of Members of Parliament has been well directed and well supported. With Catherine O'Riordan, who they act as the Secretariat of the All-Party Group, and I think we can all say that we've made progress together. Can I say to those in the government field and in Government Advisory Service, LEASE, that we often will agree that problems are there. We agree more often now than we did 5 years ago when a succession of temporary housing ministers couldn't see it as a problem. That partly was because the department didn't have any officials, or didn't have many officials working on the issue. And the failure of government and Parliament's attempt to bring in Commonhold failed, because the responsibility for that was split with the Department of Justice, who had no resources whatsoever. Nothing happened. And when we put forward the case of uniting Commonhold with Leasehold, I understand the predecessor ministry to the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government said we'll take responsibility if we get the resources, but there were no resources. I give way to the Honourable Friend.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. And we're grateful on this side for his generous comments. I know he hasn't got any physical support on his side at the moment, whereas we're mob-handed on this side of the House. But I can assure him we're here as his fan club and support structure because it is the prominent role he has played leading the campaign as co-chair that has made sure that we've been able to press government on this. And to the government's credit, it has made a whole number of commitments over the past 5 years in respect of leasehold, and we're very keen to hear the Minister's response to the Honourable Gentleman's debate, and I congratulate him on securing it.
I think that's the sort of remark I can survive. I'm grateful. Can I also say that, as I try to in each of these debates, I am a leaseholder of a small flat in my constituency, and with the other 5, we bought the freehold. We had a good freeholder, we had good managing agents, we've had no problem whatsoever, and we know how the system can work. In effect, we're Commonhold now, but we were originally freehold. Ground rents were low, and we didn't have the problem of doubling ground rents every 10 years. We didn't have the kind of crooks like Martin Payne who came in and gave informal leases, which really made a mess of people's lives. We didn't suffer from the Cengiz interests who were responsible, both in the retirement field and others, for some of the worst excesses, and where, frankly, the public authorities, the fraud people, the economic crimes people, the police and competition and market authority people failed, and the Cengiz-controlled business got away scot-free when they should have been sent to jail and should have been fined millions of pounds. The millions of pounds would have made up for the losses of the ordinary leaseholders who were failed by them. I pay tribute to Martin Boyd and Sebastian O'Kelly, who, as Chief Executive and as Trustee of Lease with others, of the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, have done so much, and they've now joined with members of the National Leasehold Campaign and with Bob Bessel, former Director of Social Services in Warwickshire, who in his retirement built 1,600 retirement homes without a single ground rent. So one of my asks to the Minister, and I do welcome my right honourable friend for coming, and thank her for coming down on a fast train from Manchester, where she gave distinguished service in the last 2 days, that please review the question of whether it really is sensible, necessary or right to allow ground rents in retirement communities, in retirement properties. We know that the Churchill Group, which I look on as son of McCarthy and Stone, and we know what McCarthy and Stone did with Peveril. They were at the foundation of some of the previous problems that hit other generations. And I would say to any Treasury civil servant who reads this debate, if we can get leasehold and commonhold right, the values of homes will go up, not down, and the income to the Treasury will go up. I'll give way.
For giving way, as someone who represents an area where we have quite a few new leasehold housing estates. They've been there, some of them for a number of years now, but these people have been hit with a double whammy. Not only are they all the costs associated with leasehold, they have service management fees now, which are absolutely enormous and actually growing. And more people are reporting to me that they can't sell their properties because they get part way through the process, then the buyer looks at the costs and says, no way.
I appreciate that. In a half-hour debate, we aren't going to be able to cover everything, but that is one of the issues to which I think the House of Commons needs to return. And I suspect we ought to have a full-day debate, preferably in government time, on the floor of the House, so that many others can come in and bear a voice for their constituents. To give an example, for those who read Private Eye on the day it comes out, there's a story about Rothsay Life, who apparently have £1.5 billion of loans, and they can revalue the interest over 30 years and take it almost as instant profit. That's the kind of thing which gets people to say, I'm going to be greedy and get away with things as long as I can.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I'd echo the comments from my honourable friend, the member for Poplar and Ninehouse, about how grateful we are for all the work that he has put in to build this campaign, at which is still growing strongly by the day. One of the issues that we are picking up is that some of the voluntary schemes that developers have entered into with leaseholders have sometimes had a little sting in the tail with additional clauses carrying on afterwards. Does the honourable member agree with me that that means it's really important for us to get something on a statutory footing as soon as possible?
The whole House will agree with the honourable gentleman. Incidentally, we've got the Competition and Market Authority help with their investigation of leasehold. And in one of my tributes to government, can I say how grateful we all are for the number of issues which have been put across to the Law Commission to try to get proposals which can be enacted, which are practical and fair. One of the ones which matter a lot is lease extensions. There are over 1 million leases, mainly of flats, which are coming down to the 80-year limit where they can't be mortgaged. Marriage value starts coming in. And at the moment, it's very difficult to get a cheap, easy, fair way of getting an extension. My view is that as and when we come to the elimination of new ground rents, that we then find a way of putting a sunset clause on old ground rents and give an incentive to freeholders to come forward with ways of actually getting some capital value now rather than none later on. I think there needs to be some kind of... they've had the dawn of their money. They also have the dusk that stops the money rolling in. And we need to have a way of saying to them, let's agree a simple chart which will say, if you take 10 years of existing ground rent, don't start saying you take a doubling and a doubling again after that, and then deal with that. I interrupt myself to say there's one announcement in the last couple of days which I think is potentially very dangerous to leaseholders, and that's the proposal that people can, without planning permission, put 2 more stories on top of a block. If the block is owned by an outside freeholder, that is going to ruin the chance of enfranchisement, and I suspect that if that's going to happen, all the value should go to the leaseholders, not to the freeholder. In fact, it might provide an incentive for the leaseholders to buy the freehold and then agree among themselves to go and deal with the problem of building on and having a bigger community. I was saying that I own a lease and part of the freehold of the block in Worthing. I'm also contracted to buy a leasehold flat being built at the moment, which may be built in 3 years' time. So if anyone thinks I've got an interest in this, I have, but if I get any benefit from it, I'll give it to a good cause. Returning to LEASE, the Leasehold Advisory Service, MPs have had difficulty with the 2 previous chairs of LEASE. The first, Deep Sagar, showed no understanding at all that LEASE should not be helping rapacious freeholders or clever managing agents to screw money out of leaseholders. He moved on, but incidentally, I would say to the civil service appointments people, count how many public appointments he's had. He's had more, I think, than I've had years in the House of Commons, and I've been 44 years in the House of Commons. The second was Roger Southam, who, when he was appointed, I took on trust. Others said he's not trustworthy. And it turned out that I was wrong and they were right. I hope that if the process is going to choose a permanent chair to lease, we now have an interim chair, that the stakeholders will be consulted on the process and, if possible, given a chance of commenting on who might be on the shortlist. And if they don't want to trust me, perhaps they could take the honourable gentleman, or right honourable gentleman for Limehouse, or one of the other people who can bring an impartial view. Lease has been led for many years by Anthony Essian. I've got no complaint about him, and on every occasion I've treated him with respect and vice versa. Lease has been changing. It's now unequivocally on the side of leaseholders, thanks to the intervention of Gavin Barwell, who, when he was Minister of Housing, was the first minister to actually get a grip of what was needed. He provided the leadership to the department, and I'm glad the department's been responding. Lease now on its website has over 100 categories where people can interact and get some of the advice that's there. The problem with that is that Lease couldn't get all the, give all the advice on practical things. So, for example, when you had the Grenfell Tower cladding type issue, where government rightly said that no public tenant, social tenants, should have to carry the cost of recladding, the private tenants were left stuck, either when they were in public blocks or in private blocks. And the advice that the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, the campaigning charity, gave was right, and the advice that Lease gave, you can go to court, was wrong, because the tribunals had to give the unfair conclusion that the leaseholder was stuck with the cost. I pay great tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Old Bexley, who, as Secretary of State for Housing, got government to agree that they would, perhaps against the advice of some civil servants, say that they would carry the cost. I pay tribute to him. He has solved a problem that would have hit otherwise many small people. There are other issues which I could cover at some length. I want to pay tribute to the National Leaseholders Campaign, Kate Kendrick and Joe, and to the Victoria Derbyshire programme, normally on BBC Two, which gave prominence at a time when it mattered. To Patrick Collinson of The Guardian, to whoever Strobes' advisor is on leasehold issues in Private Eye, and to others. And I declare this in public. If any of these big property interests threaten defamation proceedings against any of the leasehold campaigners, I will say on the floor of the House of Commons exactly what can be said about them in spades. I won't hold back. Up to now, I've been pretty restrained. But I want people to know, don't bully those who campaign for justice. I think we're all on the side of the small voice. By all means have a discussion, by all means have a disagreement, but don't think you can get away with lawyers' letters of the kind that get prominence every now and again in Strobes' legal pages.
Very much, and I do pay tribute to him and all the work that he has put in over many years on this. Many of us come in on the back of this. But does he welcome the decision in the Persimmon case in North Wales last month, and recognise that there are other leaseholders in a similar position of not having enough information when they bought out their leases? I have a situation with Barrett's Homes in my own constituency, where now leaseholders are looking to get the county council to take a similar case under trading standards. But would it not be far more efficient for the government to send out a clear message to property companies in this case that they really need to do the right thing by leaseholders who've been dishonestly sold and save all these actions and pressure on county councils and on leaseholders?
I agree with those points. And I think that it would help, perhaps, if the Ministry could consider having a round table, which wouldn't be secret, but could be informally private, to go through some of these issues. We were fortunate, in part, with Taylor Wimpey, with Pete Redfern, when we discovered, by the way, that the then chair of Lease had written totally defective documents which had put this Roger Southam as though he could control blocks which should never have been anywhere near his control. That got resolved. Taylor Wimpey said they would put aside £130 million to put right some of the things they now recognise they shouldn't have done. They haven't done enough, but at least I recognise they made a start. For the trading standards case in Wales, I think that is a way forward, and I think that each of the responsible shareholders and each of the building firms should be saying, under social responsibility and corporate governance, what are you going to do about it? That would apply to Barrett's as it would apply to the others. And for Persimmon, I hope that they're going to start saying this isn't just a Welsh judgment, where they've actually kept away from a judgment by making a voluntary payment, that they'll actually go around the rest of England as well. I end by saying this very simply. We need to abolish new leaseholds in anything except the most extreme circumstances. We need to find a way of converting to commonhold, and we need to make commonhold so well known that when people try to register, it's recognised by Help to Buy, as it is now, but wasn't then. It's recognised by Land Registry, is now, but wasn't then. And take advice and help from us and the All-Party Group, from our Secretariat, Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, and if and when there's friction, let's try to resolve it in a normal way. And I end with this offer. I hope that the Chief Executive of Lease will accept an invitation to bring all his staff to a drinks party here in the House of Commons where the All-Party Group and those who give their day-by-day advice to leaseholders can come together and we can get past any difficulties which may be there apparently at the moment.
The House has considered progress on leasehold and commonhold reform. Call the Minister to respond to the debate. Minister.
And I want to congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate today on the progress of leasehold and common home reform. A determined and formidable campaigner on this matter. I'm also grateful to the members on the opposite side of the House too, who, along with the honourable member, have been making solid progress on this really important matter, particularly with over 4 million leasehold properties in the UK at the moment. We need to ensure the system is working correctly, and where it is not, and we see unfairness and we see exploitation, then the market is held to account and it is changed so that we see a correct working system. I will indeed.
Debate on this in Westminster, on the floor of the House recently, the Back Business Committee. A number of us, including my honourable friend, the member for Ellesmere Port and others, raised the problem of people who'd bought new properties in the North West with leasehold arrangements, which are frankly a rip-off. The Minister, great champion of free enterprise that she is, I think her body language at that point conveyed that she recognised we had a case. Will she agree to meet a small delegation of us to discuss what can be done? Because, to be perfectly honest, the developers concerned, particularly Redrow in my constituency, are completely unwilling to have any discussions whatsoever about what the rights and decencies involved for our residents are.
Meet the member for Knowsley and a delegate of fellow MPs. I didn't realise he was such a good reader of body language, but he's quite right. The cases that were brought forward aren't right. It isn't working right. If you do agree with the market, it isn't working right for the market either. This shouldn't be happening at all. And let me be clear that the government is committed to improving consumer fairness in this for all leaseholders, and a vital programme of work is underway. And I want to make it quite clear that we are making sure there will be changes. We have got a programme of work, and some of that work has been happening already, and this includes how we're setting out the ban on new leaseholds for homes and how it will work, in our intention to reduce ground rents on new leases if we have them to zero. I will indeed.
She talks about going forward, which is great, but we have to go back. And we can't leave the people that have been sold a pup, quite frankly, in the state they were. And there are so many things that people tell you about how they were advised to use Taylor Wimpey's own lawyers, for instance, and they were never pointed out that these properties were leasehold. In fact, there are people still now that don't actually realise they've got a leasehold property.
The honourable member makes a very fair point. I will come to that a little bit later on. He will no doubt appreciate, if these leaseholds were from a long time ago, understanding how to unpick those legalities there, but we are working on that as well. But if I just go back to what we've done already on the leasehold house ban, I'm pleased to see that it has had an effect immediately in the market in 2017 when we first made the announcements. 10% of new build houses in England were sold as leasehold. Today, that figure has reduced to 2%. and that is significant progress, but we'll obviously want to make more, and we will still legislate to ensure that in the future, except in exceptional circumstances, all new houses will be sold on a freehold basis. Developers will no longer be able to use leases on houses as a financial gain, a practice which has become the norm in some parts of the country that we've heard again here today. It will make certain that the right tenure is used on the right properties, making it fairer for all. And these reforms will remove the incentives for developers and freeholders to use leasehold to make unjustified profits at the expense of leaseholders. Did somebody? I will indeed give way.
Giving way. Just to echo the points being made by my honourable friend about going back and whether the government sees it as a responsibility or could find some way of intervening where you have houses, identical houses on the same estate which were sold in the first phase as leasehold, which are now being sold in the second phase as freehold at the same price. Yet the owners of the first phase are being told, and there is no market, there is no choice in it, they have to pay the £3,750 to Persimmon, or probably Redrow or whoever, to have that conversion to freehold. Isn't that wrong?
Everybody here can agree that is wrong. It is the steps that we're going to have to take to get this situation under control. I'm sorry, that glass of water went down the wrong way, apologies. But as we're looking at the help for existing leaseholders, and many are faced, as you say, with onerous fees and charges, including, in some cases, doubling of ground rents. And we know that the Select Committee and many existing leaseholders want the government to legislate to amend those. We are deeply concerned about the difficulties that people are having with those charges, but we're going to have to look clearly in how, as I mentioned before, we unpick those contracts that are set there in a law. I will indeed give way to...
Generosity and of the member who got the debate. If there's one thing I would really beg her for, it's a simple, I suppose, right to buy formula, perhaps based on the number of years remaining and multiple in some way of the ground rent, that could be applied nationwide. Now, I know there will be a lot of complexities in that, but is that something that she is looking at in those plans going forward? That would be absolutely great to hear if it is.
We are indeed looking at a much simpler model that people can understand and make sense, and how to make it easier, smoother and quicker to do. But what we have done as well is to make sure that there is at the moment a voluntary way that the sector can come together to solve the problems of their own creation. The industry pledge is an important first step. It's been signed by over 60 leading developers, freeholders and managing agents, and we will be working with them and keeping a very vigilant eye on how it is working. Through that pledge, freeholders have committed to identifying any lease which doubles more frequently than every 20 years and contacting the relevant leaseholders and offer to amend their leases where necessary. I also welcome those developers who have signed the pledge not to insert these clauses into future leases. The pledge is an important first step, but something we need to keep our eye on, and we will continue to monitor how effective it is being, supporting leaseholders and take further action where necessary. The government is also looking... Was that somebody trying to get in? I will indeed let the honourable member...
Very generous, but I just wanted to come back to that point, and it's very interesting to hear that there is this voluntary organisation or voluntary assembly of the various house builders and developers being brought together. But surely, is there not some sort of opportunity for a paid-for body, funded by all those builders, to come together, and it's actually acting to arbitrate on behalf of the leaseholders, to come at a sensible cost for them to pay for the conversion to a freehold? Wouldn't that be a better solution, an independent body funded by the builders?
These ideas that have come forward are being looked at, figuring out which is the way forward, and that may well be something that ends up happening. At this moment, I cannot say, but we will be taking and looking at every idea that comes forward. The government, again, is looking to standardise the enfranchisement process and has asked the Law Commission to review the current arrangements. This is to support existing leaseholders and includes making buying, as we mentioned before, of a freehold or extending a lease easier, quicker and as cost-effective as possible. The Law Commission is currently analysing responses to its consultation paper on leasehold enfranchisement, reform, leasehold home ownership, buying your freehold or extending your lease. They will report back to government on the options for reducing the price of this autumn and all other aspects of the enfranchisement regime early next year, and I look forward to receiving their recommendations. I will indeed give way. There's so many people who do want to make a comment, and we all right by the public.
Yes, I thank the Minister for giving way. If there is evidence of mis-selling, collusion between solicitors and developers, what action can the Minister and the Government take?
I will come to that later, but he, hopefully as well as I know that is looking at, and where that can be proved and where that is wrong and where it is unlawful, it will be taken to check. But there is obviously still more that we need to be doing. Our recent publications show that other plans we have to leasehold reform include our response to the technical consultation on implementing reforms to the leasehold market and our response to the Select Committee, where we were able to accept in full or in part most of their recommendations. We've also committed to regulating managing agents and improving the transparency and fairness of service charges. Too often people feel ripped off by fees and charges, sometimes not even being told what they are paying for. We have committed to introducing a single, mandatory and legally enforceable code of practice to set standards across the sector, and will also require agents to be qualified in order to do this practice. Last October, we established an independent working group, which was chaired by Lord Best, to look at how standards can be raised across the whole of the property sector and consider how fees, such as service charges, should be presented to consumers. The working group published its final report to government in July, and we are considering their recommendations, and we will announce the next steps in due course. I will indeed give way.
The whole House is grateful to my right honourable friend. There may not be time to get through all the things that government is doing and is looking forward to doing. So it might be possible that she could consider doing a written statement that will actually lay things out so it's available to all and not just to us who are here. One of the things which may not come to that straight away is looking at the RTA regulations, the Recognised Tenants Association, in effect recognising leaseholders, which I know is a tricky issue. I was written to by the government saying that they would consult with the Property Tribunal about how it was working. I didn't ask for an instant response, but that is one of the issues which would go forward. And just in finishing, can I say to the Minister that I do think that her response to the Select Committee's report is very good. The Select Committee's report was one of the best I've seen in all my time in this House, and government's responding to it well.
Minister, with 2 minutes to go.
I was checking the time. Thank you, Mr. Owen, for saying that. My honourable friend makes a very good point. We could lay this down. We should lay this down. We will lay this down as a written statement. It is something that everybody across the House appreciates is bad practice, and where bad practice happens in whatever form, it should be taken to task. It's also unacceptable that some freehold homeowners are unable to challenge excessive fees for the maintenance of their estates. And we're going to legislate so residential freeholders will be given the right to challenge the reasonableness of such fees. They will also be able to apply to the tribunal to appoint a new manager. This will help increase the transparency, accountability and reasonableness of these fees. Many leaseholders have raised concerns that they believe they were missold their properties. The leasehold tenure was not properly explained to them and the onerous terms were not made clear. Some were told that they would be able to buy the freehold for a certain price after a couple of years, only to find out that it had been sold on to an investor in that time, and therefore either the price had gone up considerably or they could not buy it. So I welcome the Competition and Markets Authority's current investigation into this issue. Now, I do appreciate I'm running out of time. Again, I will indeed meet with my colleagues. I want to thank the Honourable Member for bringing this important matter to the floor of the House. I know it's something that all colleagues want to get right. Abuses will not be accepted by any of us. Thank you.
Very grateful to Minister. The question is, the House has considered progress on leasehold and common reform. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.